It's been a privilege for over 43 years to be serving the persecuted churches, mainly in Africa, but also in Eastern Europe. President Donald Trump did us all a great service a few weeks ago when he spoke at the United Nations, and he told that cesspool of iniquity and wickedness that not only are they useless, but that what are they doing to care for the persecuted, and that Christians are the most persecuted people on earth. And he did not exaggerate. People have been complaining about Donald Trump, but global persecution of Christians has hit a 30-year high. It's not only a reality, it's in fact increasing at this moment. Over 400 million Christians live under 67 governments which restrict religious freedom and which persecute believers today. Now, this map is not accurate. Can somebody show me? You should be able to notice immediately two glaring omissions. This is meant to be where there's persecution in the church, but I can see two countries missing that should definitely be on there.
Ukraine?
Ukraine is an obvious one, yes, quite right. Why is Ukraine, the dictator Zelensky, closed down the biggest denomination in the country, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, locked up the ministers, even the Archbishop locked up, can you imagine? And closed down churches, arrested ministers and nuns.
I just want to ask quickly, who authored this map? Because by the looks of things, this is not Western propaganda again.
It is Western propaganda. Why they put Belarus and the Russian Federation, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
why they left out Ukraine, and why is Zimbabwe not on there? But anyway, this is just the kind of, this is done by Voice of the Martyrs, and I think they would have done a good job under our friend Richard Wurmbrand, but this is not accurate. This is propaganda.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. Is what is persecuted, red or blue? Because I see countries in...
The purple is meant to be the most persecuted, the high persecution, and the red is medium persecution.
How is Sudan not on the... I mean, how is...
Well, Sudan is on the map, but not South Sudan, which is, I mean, no, there they've been correct. They've got Sudan on, which they certainly should. Interestingly, Maldives is one of the worst places in the world for persecution of the church. It might be a nice holiday resort for us, but it's not nice for the people who live there.
I can't see Britain on there,
Well, remember what Keir Starmer said. Britain invented free speech.
Well, as you raised once before, Peter, was that a lady praying for
Yes,
Christian beliefs.
a grandmother praying on the street, and a British bobby comes up and says, "Were you praying?" And she says, "Yes." Now she's praying quietly. And what are we praying? What does it matter? You're in a no prayer zone. She is across the street from an abortion clinic, and she is praying silently, not holding a banner, not using a megaphone, not speaking out loud, praying silently, and she gets arrested. Handcuffed, taken away, fingerprints, the whole thing. And a friend of mine in Bristol got arrested for preaching the gospel in open air, and it offended some Muslims or something. Now, here's a major retired from the British Army, and he's doing open air preaching, and they arrested him in Bristol. Can you imagine? That's where George Whitfield began open air preaching.
Speaking of Britain and that, have you heard there was a guy on the news, a 100-year-old war veteran, who
Yes.
said that Britain, it wasn't worth it.
The sacrifices, all the people who died in the Second World War. No, I can only understand that because I've met a lot of men over the years in the Moths, the Memorial Order of Tin Hats, who've said the same. Even my own father, who spent 6 years serving in the Royal Artillery and 8th Army, he said, if we could have seen what would happen to Britain after the war, we wouldn't have fought against one another, we would have fought side by side against the real enemy. And I think he had the real enemy in mind was more like the government in Whitehall. Interesting, I've heard that from so many soldiers that they regret their involvement. And in fact, I've even heard some saying it's a pity we didn't lose the war because then we'd still have Britain. But they've lost everything. Well, Donald Trump followed this up by recently accusing the Nigerian government of doing nothing to care for their people, which is so true. Trump threatens war in Nigeria to save Christians. That's newspaper headlines in Nigeria. Well, the Nigerian government has said it's impossible for there to be persecution of the church in Nigeria because we have religious freedom in the constitution. I mean, how's that for a piece of nonsense? By the way, have you noticed South Africa right now has shown that we don't have freedom of speech in the country because Solidarity paid for a banner advertising saying, welcome to the most race-regulated country in the world. And this, although they paid for it and we meant to have freedom of speech, they took it down. And it's because the G20 people are going to come, and at the airport they wanted to make a protest. So I thought we had freedom to protest, we have freedom of speech, but apparently we don't even have that.
It's reserved for certain.
Yeah, 145 race-based laws in the country, and therefore South Africa has more race regulations now than even National Party had under apartheid South Africa. And in anywhere else in the world, affirmative action is to help minorities. And this is the only place in the world where the affirmative action is to help the minorities, the majority, not the minority, which is bizarre. Well, it came even better than that. The Nigerian army even stood up and said, there's no persecution in Nigeria. Nobody's being persecuted there at all. Well, in Nigeria, just in the last 15 years, over 20,000 churches and Christian schools have been attacked. At least 52,000 Christians have been killed and 18,500 abducted or kidnapped just in the last 15 years. Most of the kidnapped are considered unlikely to have survived. Just in the first 7 months of this year, 2025, over 7,000 Christians were killed in northern Nigeria, mostly by Boko Haram terrorists and Fulani tribesmen. And yet you've got the Nigerian government and its apologists saying there's no persecution in Nigeria. Well, I don't know, this looks pretty bad to me. Now, Boko Haram and the Fulani tribesmen look like this. You know, when you think of Fulani tribesmen, you sort of think of some, herding sheep who runs and hits somebody over the head with his canop carrier or throws a spear at him. But these are very well equipped, very well armed terrorists. They've even got armored cars and so on. Now, it just so happens that there's jihad all over the world. And Islam, it's a good thing Islam is a peaceful and tolerant religion. Imagine if they were violent. Notice most of the wars in the world happen where Islam borders other religions. And so there's blood-stained borders. And yet they are called peaceful and tolerant. Now, I've been to Lancaster County and I've met the Amish and the Mennonites. Now, what do you call the Amish and Mennonites if the most violent religion on earth is called peaceful and tolerant? So what can you call the pacifist Amish now? Well, if Islam can be called peaceful and tolerant, the words have no meaning. Now, Africa today is divided between a Muslim north and a Christian south, and it's often blood-stained borders at that. This is a Muslim map. I think it's full of exaggerations. There's no way Islam is the majority religion in Ethiopia, nor Tanzania, but according to them, that is, notice South Africa, they already say we are between 1% and 4%. In fact, we're less than that, but they're claiming countries. This is an Islamic put-out map that is an exaggeration, but you get the idea. And there's a battle for the soul of Africa. Now, Nigeria, whose capital is Abuja, but whose largest city is Lagos, they've got an interesting heritage. Unlike most countries in Africa, the oil is in the south. Now, the Arabs are used to controlling the oil, but in Nigeria, it's the Christian Igbo people who control the oil, which is an inversion of the way it should be. Muslims must control the oil. How dare Christians control the oil? And so this has led to some serious wars in the country. There are three major tribal groups in Nigeria. The Hausa are the biggest, they're in the north, and the Fulani. The Yoruba are in the southwest, and they are a very large Christian tribe, and then the Igbo. Now, the Igbo were evangelized by people like Mary Slessor. The Yoruba were evangelized by people like Samuel Ajayi Crowther. But nobody could evangelize the Hausa because under the British Empire, no missionaries were allowed in the Muslim north. By the way, they did the same in Sudan. The British administration forbade missionaries to go to the Muslim north. It would upset the Muslims, you know, because they're so peaceful and tolerant. So the reason why we've got the chaos here is to a large extent due to the fact that the Christians forbade evangelism to the Muslim North in the past. Now, Christianity was at one time the majority in Nigeria. Today they say that the Muslims are the majority. So you can see the Muslim northern provinces, very heavy. Darker the green, the higher the percentage of Muslims. And here they claim that today Islam is the majority and Christianity slipped below the majority, which is possible, considering Muslims can have 4 wives at a time and they have unlimited amounts of children, and considering Christians aren't having as many children, it's very dangerous. Not to mention the culture of abortion amongst many Christians. Sorry to say. We know that Christians should be pro-life, but that's not the way it works out in practice. Now, notice the literacy rate amongst the Muslim North is very low. The Christians are the most literate, the Muslims are the least literate. And it makes sense. Protestants in particular have always emphasized the need for literacy and to read the Bible for yourself. Well, I've documented over the years much persecution of Christians in Nigeria. So this is not a recent phenomenon, but it is getting worse. What I'd like people to pay attention to is that the perverted American agenda of Barack Hussein Obama destabilized Nigeria to the mess they're in right now. You might recall there was 240 predominantly Christian girls abducted from school and they were taken by Boko Haram. Now, concerning Nigeria, a former US Congressman, Steve Stockman, a member of the US congressional delegation sent to Nigeria in the months after kidnapping of the hundreds of schoolgirls by Boko Haram, he confirmed with LifeSite News that a senior US general informed them they had intelligence, real-time intelligence, that could have aided the Nigerian military to crush the terrorist group. They had the sites exactly from satellite technology, I presume, of where the kidnapped girls were and where the leadership of Boko Haram were. They could have decapitated Boko Haram, freed the girls, but they were blocked from providing this information to the Nigerian authorities by the Obama administration from the highest level, quote unquote. The reason given for this refusal of critical intelligence that could have made all the difference in the war against terrorism in Nigeria was Nigeria's pro-family stance, resisting the same-sex marriage demands of the Obama administration. Obama had just been to Africa in 2013 on his African safari, giving the gospel of gay marriage, and he went down like a lead balloon, and particularly Nigeria was not interested in his nonsense. And so he wanted to pay them back by refusing his generals what they should have done normally. They would have normally shared this information with the Nigerian military, but they were forbidden to. And USAID has invested a lot of money in Nigeria to promote LGBTQ, trans, perversion stuff. And I don't know if you can tell, I can't immediately tell that these people are that kind of limp-wristed bunch, but this is pretty unambiguous. And as a result of the deteriorating security situation in northern Nigeria, the voters saw the failure of Goodluck Jonathan's presidency. He lost the recent presidential elections. Goodluck Jonathan was a nominal Christian. I don't know how Christian his administration was, but they were at least not Muslim. And he was doing something, but the US presidency just destabilized him because he was not just lukewarm, he was ice cold to the idea of LGBTQ agenda. So in the presidential elections, they had Buhari against Goodluck Jonathan, and Buhari, think Islam, think peace. We only have 3 political parties in Nigeria. So, well, Buhari, Muhammadu Buhari, was not just a Muslim, he was elected in a highly contested election, and this is the 5th election to be held since the end of military rule in Nigeria. And the elections were first scheduled for 2015, but they were postponed due to instability caused by Boko Haram insurgency. And the Christians were protesting, waiting for our girls, no rescue, no vote, bring back our girls. So the voter turnout was the lowest ever, 43%. The election marked the first time an incumbent president had lost re-election in Nigeria, and the first time that a previous military dictator had won an election after being ousted. Absolutely bizarre, not possible without US intervention causing the grief. So Our friends in Nigeria informed us that most people who voted for Muhammadu Buhari did so because Jonathan's administration had failed to curb Boko Haram and Buhari had promised to end it decisively. Here's Muhammadu Buhari visiting the Kaaba in Mecca during the Hajj. So he is obviously a dedicated Muslim, and here he is receiving the King of Saudi Arabia, because the relationship between the Saudis and Nigeria has been very tight. And Muhammadu Buhari, speaking at the Organization of African Unity, there is suspicion that the Muslim terrorists and the Muslim presidential candidate were working towards a similar goal of removing Christians from power in Africa's most populous nation. Up till then, it was always a practice in Nigeria, a sort of understood rule, that if you have a Muslim president, you must have a Christian vice president. If you have a Christian president, you must have a Muslim vice president. That stopped with Muhammadu Buhari. Muslim everything. Christians purged from government. The Nigerians expressed their frustration, as putting it mildly, that the American interference under Obama and the blind promotion of LGBTQ perversion sabotaged attempts to free the kidnapped girls from Boko Haram. To think many of these kidnapped girls, doubtless abused by then, and who knows how much since, could have been freed, but for some pervert saying, I'm going to stamp my feet and I'm going to sulk because you won't accept my agenda. No rescue, no vote. Bring back our girls. Our future leaders are missing. Bring them back. So this all undermined the Nigerian military's attempts to defeat the jihadists and brought about a catastrophic return to rule by a Muslim who used to be the military dictator of the country. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. If this was part of a Monty Python comedy, you'd say this is ridiculous. But this is what happened. 2 Peter 2:19 says, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. And as Newsweek declared, the first gay president, and apparently he really was the first gay president, and there's a lot of evidence that, in fact, Michelle Obama is Michael Obama, and that she's a tranny, just like the French president's wife. That you're actually dealing with trans. To think you can be that blatant in the world that they actually have perverts and transgender characters in presidencies, not just in France, but even in the United States. Well, I've got an article on the Frontline web over the perverted US agenda destabilized Nigeria. I should tell you another, sorry?
Sorry for the interjection. Barack Obama on the issue of gayism, didn't he have a wife that was?
Yes, but that's what we're saying. His wife was a transgender.
He was transgender.
You must Google, is Michelle Obama a male? And just see the pictures that come up. It's pretty convincing that Michelle Obama was actually a man, was the same Michael.
And those children, she never even
So it was some facial surgery.
Yeah. And you know that the French President Macron's wife, what's her name?
Bridget Macron.
Bridget, yeah, is actually, I think, Jean-Paul or something. Candace Owens put out a lot of expose on that the president's wife in France was born a male. And there's no record of her existing before, what, her 30s or something? So this is a complete, what do you call it? It's such a distorted reality. It makes you sick to the stomach to even think about these things. But yeah, no, Barack Hussein Obama, there are people who've come forward and said they performed gay sex on Barack Obama when he was a senator in Chicago. And no, it's sickening, filthy kind of details. This guy was a real low-life pervert. And the media knew it, and they suppressed the information to enable him to win a second term. And it all came out afterwards. But quite aside from the fact that people in Kenya give you a guided tour of where Barack Hussein Obama was born, and his, I think his grandmother gives people guided tours. This is where the American president was born, which makes it illegal.
And also he has had people murdered.
Oh.
Shut them up.
Not as many as the Clintons, but still, yes. So it's quite a story. But to think Nigeria is suffering under Islam today and the increased persecution of Christians as a direct result of what Obama's administration did back then. So that's an expose on our web already. But the West also betrayed Nigeria earlier than that. Are you aware about the Biafran Civil War? Or we should call it the Nigerian Civil War or the Biafran War. From 1966 to 1970, there was a struggle for Nigeria, and would you believe it, the Christians seceded, the Christian Ibu, and the East Central states and Southeastern states seceded from Nigeria, but they made a horrible mistake. They had the oil, so they weren't going to be allowed to just mind their own business. The British government, the Soviet Union, Red China, got involved in helping the Muslim government to annihilate the Christians. America played a double role. They said America claimed to be neutral, while they gave weapons to the Muslim North to wipe out the Christian South, while the churches supported independent groups to fly in relief aid food to the Nigerian Biafrans who were being starved to death by the blockade. So you had the United States, Red China, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain helping the Muslims, and the only people helping the Christians were Portugal, a little bit of France, but France was very ambiguous about their help, and South Africa. And it's an intriguing story, the Biafran story. Now, when I was at school, I remember we were giving our school lunches to help people who were taking food to the Biafrans, and that was a big thing back then. So what happened was the Nigerian government was so corrupt that the Ibus, who were the most literate, educated people in the country, they had the highest standards of living, they had the highest academic standards. The Ibus staged a coup which seized control in 1966 of Nigeria. And immediately there was such hostility that there was a counter coup back. And this is General Gowon, who is meant to be a Christian, but he was the front man for the Muslim North, trying to regain control over the South because the Ibus have the oil. So Gowon was British trained, and he was trying to bring the country back under one. There were riots and attacks all over the country, and Ibus, thousands of Ibu tradesmen were slaughtered up in northern states, over 7,000. That's just northern states where Muslims are the majority. And so the Ibus felt they were being persecuted because the people who happened to seize power in Lagos were Ibu, and now they were being all picked on by other tribes around the country. So they retreated into their homeland and declared independence. And there was this massive move of Ibus from all over Nigeria consolidated back to their homeland, which the missionary Mary Slessor once worked in. Now, a colonel in the Nigerian army became the first president of Biafra. This is Colonel, just forgetting his name for a moment, Ajuba, perhaps? He was trained in Oxford. He had, in fact, been in Lincoln College, Oxford, had received his master's in history, and he was British trained as a military man and decided that his country was better off seceding. And Ibu land was not only the most densely populated part of the country, but it had so much more advanced. The cities were the most advanced. They had the most trades. They had highest knowledge of the different skills in engineering. And they decided we want nothing more to do with Nigeria. We're being persecuted by the rest of Nigeria, and that's the end of it. By the way, the British were advised by missionaries for years to give separate independence to the Hausa in the north, the Muslim north, which had never been directly ruled by Britain, but had always been ruled indirectly. The British liked indirect rule through sheikhs and imams, and basically it was a whole bunch of caliphates in the north anyway. The Yoruba of the southwest also should be separate, and the Ibus of the southeast. But the British put them all in one big country, which they just chose the name arbitrarily, Nigeria. There'd never been a country called Nigeria. There was Yoruba land, there was Igbo land, there was Hausa land, and then suddenly it's all one country, Nigeria, with only 240 different languages. But no, we're all going to be one country. And somehow this was not allowed to be questioned. Well, Biafra questioned it, and Biafra seceded. And they were actually a powerhouse, but they had most of the wealth of the country. And this is the problem. The Muslim North, Muslims like the idea of passive income. We don't do any work, we just lie on our couches surrounded by harems and servants, and some foreigners come and extract the oil and give us lots of money. So the idea that the Christians have the oil, this is wrong. This is against the laws of nature. The oil should be in the north, controlled by the Muslims. So they pushed the most. It was the Muslim North who pushed the most for the unitary state from the beginning, because they wanted to be able to get most of the wealth of the country, which happened to be mostly in the south. So peace, unity, freedom was the slogan, with the leopards and the fish eagle and the tusk for Biafra. And the Biafran military came from the Nigerian army mainly. It's the Igbos provided most of the officers in the Nigerian army. Nigerian army at the beginning of the Biafran war, which the Nigerians of course call the civil war, but the Biafrans don't see it as a civil war, which is a war against Biafra. And there were only 6,000 soldiers in the whole Nigerian army at the beginning of this. And most of the officers left and went down to Biafra, because they were Igbos. So the situation at the beginning was really quite difficult and awkward for the rest of Nigeria. And so they tried to wage war against Biafra. Biafra was too historic, and there we go, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu. Now, he was the inspiration for Frederick Forsyth's book, The Dogs of War. And the Republic of Biafra had a few people who recognized him. Tanzania recognized him, the Ivory Coast recognized him, and I don't know if South Africa officially recognized him, but South Africa supported him and traded with him. And France, in exchange for oil, was willing to trade with him somewhat too. So the Biafrans had the Biafran pound, which was real money, and it was worth a lot at the beginning. And the Biafran people had a very high standard of culture and living. They didn't have many weapons, but they got them fairly soon. They kept building up. They built up the army because they had such a good officer corps, trained by the Brits at that, Sandhurst people. And interestingly enough, all their weapons they captured from the enemy. So when they were asked, where do you get your weapons from? They said, the enemy is my quartermaster. And they captured these from the Nigerian army. And at the beginning of the war, they won spectacularly because they were the best led. They had all the trained officers. But they had every kind of weapon. They had British weapons, which had been in the armories of the Nigerian forces. They managed to get a whole lot of Soviet bloc weapons as well, also captured from the enemy. Here you can see the R1, which is the same kind of weapon we used in the South African infantry, 7.62. And the Nigerian forces were targeted horribly by the federal forces. The federal forces had mercenaries such as the Air Force MiGs and Aleutian bombers were flown by Egyptian Muslims who came and worked for them. You see the old style bazookas before RPGs became popular. And Nigerian conflict became a brutal conflict. There was never a real front line as such. This is unfortunately some Biafrans captured by, and local missionaries trying to help them, captured by the Nigerian federal forces. The Biafran army. And this gives you a bit of a feel for what was on the go. Soviet bloc weapons started to come in because the Soviet Union and Red China were supplying the federal forces. And, yep, carrying mortar bombs is an essential part of any infantryman's job too. Carrying machine guns. You need quite good posture to be able to balance machine guns on your head. But this gives you a bit of a feel for how it was operating. This is unfortunately the Nigerian Federal Forces, who were very brutal. And just an interesting observation, more bullets were fired in the Nigerian Civil War between 1967 and 1970 than all bullets fired on all sides of the Second World War, including the Pacific Theatre, the Western Front, the Eastern Front. And the difference is, in the Second World War, most soldiers used bolt-action rifles. Nigerian Civil War, most soldiers had automatic weapons. It's an interesting point that we waste so much ammunition when you've got automatic. We were forbidden to ever go into automatic in the South African Army. We had an automatic option, but we always had to keep it on signal shot, and we got into deep trouble if we ever switched onto automatic. And they'd use this example, you know, Nigerian army would go to the front, fire over their heads until they, as they called it, defoliated the forest, killed a lot of innocent birds up in the trees and a bunch of poor monkeys, and then they went back and said, we need more ammunition. And that's the way a lot of the Nigerian forces, federal forces, operate, a lot of wastage of ammunition. Because you just think how people like Paul Kruger, he's sent out with one bullet to go and get supper. And then you've got these people who, you've got a few thousand rounds and they use them all and they hit nothing. Well, nothing that they should be hitting anyway. So there was a lot of wastage because of the automatic weapons, and it's one of the first wars where they had fully automatic weapons on all sides. The poor Biafrans kept having to flee at the Ibus as the federal forces bombed civilian areas. They bombed hospitals, they bombed schools, they bombed marketplaces, they bombed civilian centers. And in fact, it's notable by the missionaries who worked there that the Biafrans sang. They sang while working, they sang while training, they sang while moving from one side to the other, they sang coming to church, they sang when they were in the marketplace. And yet there is also so much tragedy and so much people seriously wounded by the bombing. One of the comments made by military observers is that the Egyptian pilots, the Arab pilots who were from Egypt, flying the Aleutians and the MiGs, were very shy, they put the word, of anti-aircraft fire. So they tended to avoid all military targets and they rather bombed civilians. And this is a Nigerian demonstration outside the French embassy because France was trading with Biafra in exchange for oil. So France gave some weapons and some food in exchange for oil. And so here's the Gaul wants our oil. So this is probably a protest organized by the government, but at least the people wrote their signs. It wasn't all just printed for them, like modern demos. The atrocities are horrific, and the callousness, the amount of people lost limbs in this conflict. It was absolutely disgraceful. No real ambulances. I've seen this too, where you're using normal vehicles to try and transport people crippled from the... So the war in Biafra was quite a story, and there were mercenaries on both sides. Mercenary soldiers, churches, and scoundrels, an epic struggle of independence. There's a lot of mercenaries went to fight there. Unfortunately, there were British and Canadian pilots flying for the Nigerian Federal Forces. And there were Canadians, Australians, Norwegians, Finns, and others, Swedes, flying for the Biafrans to get in relief aid. There were people on both sides, and there were French. You can always see that only the French will wear a beret like that with the badge to the side. We've always trained to have our beret over our right eye, and so the whole idea of moving it to your side, that's, for some bizarre reason, that's the way the French do it. I believe this man on the left is South African, but I might be slightly wrong. There's a lot of Brits involved. You can see the way the British are wearing their uniforms. This man must be South African. That's a South African Springbok. And if I'm not mistaken, that chap's Canadian, that chap's French. So it's a who's who of the mercenaries. And the mercenaries were brought in because they had skills and they wanted money, and they could be paid with real money at the beginning. And you can see they like to make use of the old Land Rovers and heavy machine guns mounted on it. This chap is quite a character. He's a German, Rolf Steiner, who had fought in the French Foreign Legion. He was too young for the Second World War, so he experienced bombings in Germany. He joined the French Foreign Legion because the French Foreign Legion didn't care where you came from as long as you fought for France. And then you could get French citizenship. And he started the Death Head unit in Biafra. And Rolf Steiner is quite a character, a real adventurer. After Biafra, he fought in the Congo. He also fought in South Sudan. So he went all over the place. And he is depicted with obviously an Australian. But Rolf Steiner's book's called The Last Adventure. Well, not so. He thought it was going out of fashion. I think we've had a few adventurers since him, but still, I think he is thinking the world after the Second World War was boring. And here's the last one willing to be an adventurer, but not so. Even in this book on modern African wars, you can see that stylized this mercenary on Rolf Steiner. He's quite a well-known character, and here he is writing about his wars in Sudan and in Biafra. Other mercenaries, and some of the people that they trained. Rolf Steiner was renowned as very brutal because he apparently would take enemy forces, decapitate them and put their heads on spikes to terrify the invading forces, so that when the Nigerian federal forces came and they saw these spikes and with the heads of their commanders and comrades in the jungle, they'd turn around and flee. And so he was a brutal character. This is what the Nigerian Air Force was flying, MiG-17s, and you could see there were mercenaries on the federal forces side. In fact, there were British SAS forces guiding Nigerian federal forces in attacking the Nigerians. Now here you've got a very interesting character, Count Carl Gustav van Rosen, bottom right. And he came from Sweden and developed basically the Biafran Air Force. You can see how they were hemmed in. Nigeria had a navy, so they just blockaded Port Harcourt. They seized a lot of the coastal areas. Port Harcourt, the most important naval port. And so the Nigerian federal forces basically took away all access to the sea from Biafra, and Biafra was confined to an ever narrower area until they went from 50,000 square miles down to something like 3,000 square miles towards the end. One of our good friends, whose picture's at the back of the upper room hall here, Colonel Jan Breitenbach, was at that time a commandant, and he was sent from South Africa to take a company of South African paratroopers to help the Biafrans. Totally secret. He never was able to write about it because he signed the Official Secrets Act about it. But he told me when we were in the field in Southwest Africa and Angola, sleeping in the sleeping bag next to the colonel, I learned a lot of things. And he was sent in super secret event, South Africa going to help the Biafrans. And the book and film, The Dogs of War, bases the main character over Colonel or Commandant Jan Breitenbach, interestingly. Right down to his very interesting steely blue eyes. Well, Colonel Breitenbach was one of the very first of the paratroopers in South Africa, and he also founded 44 Parachute Brigade, which won the biggest airdrop battle in South African history, Operation Smoke Shell. He also founded 3-2 Battalion. So Colonel Breitenbach was an incredible character. 3-2 Battalion recruited thousands of black Angolan, Portuguese-speaking ex-FNLA people who would have been our enemies one time, to recruit them to join the South African infantry and to fight for South Africa against the communists in Angola. And Frederick Forsyth, when he wrote the Biafra story, said that he modeled his main character there on Commandant Breitenbach. So Frederick Forsyth, who later wrote The Dogs of War, his Dogs of War character, and you might have even seen the film, The Dogs of War, it starts off with an incredible scene, and that scene at the beginning was based on Colonel Breitenbach being on the last flight out of Uli, as he is taking off and everything's blowing up behind him. That scene was based on Colonel Breitenbach's final exit. He is the last plane out of Biafra. Now, Carl Gustav Rosen, he is from Sweden. He flew them in by plane, these crated up and then assembled them in Biafra, these little, what he called mini-cons. And these he made into Nigeria's Air Force. He fitted rockets underneath the wing pods and made them a very effective flight weapon. He had one other Swede in his Air Force and he had 2 Biafrans. So there were 4 of them, all 4. And they flew these mini-cons in the bush and they were the counterattack. They went in and they destroyed the MiGs on the ground before the MiGs could get up. And they destroyed Aleutian bombers as well. These are the Soviet weapons. And I mean, can you imagine the courage? You're getting up there in the jungle and you're flying these little light planes in order to take out modern MiG fighter bomber jets. Well, then there was a Polish pilot who was a fighter ace from the Second World War, and he brought in these Douglas B-26 Invaders, the Sharks. And this was Jan Zumbach. He was this Polish fighter air ace who came in to fight for the Biafrans. So interesting, you had South Africans, German, who has a French passport, a Swedish count at that. And by the way, the Swedish Count van Rosen, he was the brother-in-law of German fighter air ace Hermann Göring. So he actually once got arrested in Britain. He was flying out the last documents of the Dutch government in a DC-3, landed in England, and in interrogating him, they found out that he was related to Hermann Göring, and so they immediately arrested him. He tried to join the Royal Air Force, and Van Rosen was just imprisoned by the Brits, and he had to escape from them. But what a character. Van Rosen also went and fought for the Ethiopian emperor against communists as well, so he was involved in fighting for Ethiopia as well. Quite a character. But here's this Polish man who started the only bomber force that the Nigerians had. And they sometimes took out whole columns of Nigerian federal forces who were seeking to attack them. And that's the work of these folks. And of course, Colonel Breitenbach with his paratroopers, I might say that here they've got some of the heart-rending pictures of the starvation. The Biafran army was doing well. But what killed their war effort was their families back home were starving. The Nigerian Navy was blockading them, they were being starved, and they could not survive. It was the highest concentration of population in all of Nigeria. So Ibuland or Biafra had too many people for the land, not enough food, and it was the policy of the Nigerian government to starve them to death. And it's absolutely heartrending. Some of you may recall in the 60s seeing pictures like this. And this is why we had Tear Fund. And
So it's all very similar to Gaza, isn't it?
unfortunately, today, in our age, it's Gaza. In the 70s, it was Ethiopia.
Yeah, this reminds me.
But in the 60s, it was the Biafrans.
You know, these pictures remind me of Live Aid. Like in 1985, there was this concert by Westerns.
Yes.
Yes.
So, in fact, this Biafra is the birth of Médecins Sans Frontières. They believe Doctors Without Borders started specifically because of the Biafran War, and that's why they've become one of the biggest and most effective humanitarian groups around the world. I just can't believe what malnutrition and starvation does to people. Absolutely shocking. So this is why, I mean, here's the person traveling with a coffin on the back of his bicycle, and it must have been made too small, or maybe it's being reused because they had to break out the back to let the feet stick out. Heartrending. And then, of course, children being burned from the attacks. This was such trauma. And here people are marching over the children in Biafra, and apathy kills, which is so true. This looks like New York protests, probably marching to the United Nations demanding action. Well, the C-97 here, this is mercenary pilots came from around the world to try and fly in aid to the Biafrans. So this Lockheed Super Constellation was one of the many planes being flown in. The Canadian Presbyterian Church, Oxfam Canada, used to hire these planes out, and this was international aid relief coming into Nigeria. And so one night, this plane hit some trees trying to land on the darkened runway, crashed, killing all on board, including the 3 crew members. And this was a life-threatening thing. They had to dodge the MiGs of the Nigerian Federal Forces and get into Biafra to deliver food aid. And so this is the Spirit of Iceland, the International Red Cross. I believe this plane was actually shot down, fully laden DC-7, shot down by 2 MiGs. And so they decided they're no longer going to fly in during the day, they're going to fly in at night, which is a lot more dangerous. And so they started flying in at night, and this is the kind of planes that we also have used, smuggling weapons, Bibles and everything else behind lines in New Mountain and Sudan. You've got to make sure everything's well strapped down, because they're not just flying, they're having to maneuver and bank and try and avoid missiles and coming in at steep angles. You don't want any of these boxes going loose. And this is sometimes coming in at night, your only guidance. They'd only switch on the lights for a few minutes, sometimes seconds, orientate and come down because of the danger of night fighting illusions that might bomb them. So the airports soon were all over, and at the end it was just Uli or Annabella was there. But this was just a strip of highway that they turned into a airport because all the others had been bombed by the federal forces. So basically they were landing on the main road. And that was the last actual airstrip left open. And as the federal forces encroached more and more and more on Biafra, and they were down to very few square kilometers, this is the scene at the beginning of the Dogs of War film, which although it's set in a film in somewhere in Central America, it's actually based on the extraction from Uli of Commandant Jan Breitenbach. And so this incredible scene at the beginning where they take off and the whole place just explodes underneath them, that the director said he directly based it on Commandant Jan Breitenbach's exit from Uli, the last plane out of Uli at the end of the war. And of course, so many people suffered, but this is where so many humanitarian groups, I've heard people saying Biafra was the birth of the NGO. Well, it was certainly the birth of Médecins Sans Frontières, and it inspired a lot of other great groups. And here's the Doctors Without Borders team. They had worked for Red Cross, but Red Cross tried to follow the laws and the rules too much. And so Doctors Without Borders grew out of Red Cross because they didn't care about the laws. They would break the laws to save starving people. And I've seen these folks in some of the worst of places. They weren't in Rwanda, though. When I went into Rwanda, even they had been pulled out. Only Samaritan's Purse was left in Rwanda in 1995, but still. Doctors Without Borders gave us some help when we were arrested in Mozambique. And I remember specifically they asked us anything we could do to help. And I said, do you have a toothbrush? And they brought me through a brand new toothbrush. Still in its packaging, which I was very grateful for. Not that they need toothpaste, but they did have toothbrush. We asked for soap, we got some soap too. So Doctors Without Borders is an amazing group. And then there's other books that came out of it, Women and Conflict in the Nigerian Civil War. And there's so much to learn from Biafra and what the poor people went through there. You can see this woman must be Roman Catholic with that kind of cross. And maybe she's waiting to get the thread back onto her necklace. Notice the anti-Biafrans called it a rebellion. I think the rebels are often called rebels, but the rebels don't see themselves as rebels, they're fighting for freedom. The story of Nigerian Civil War, now they say here over 2 million died. Most statistics I'm saying is that they think at least 3 million died of starvation. Very few from bullets and bombs. Most were killed by starvation. Well, interestingly, the Colonel Ojukwe of Nigeria, he fled at the very end and was taken into exile in Ivory Coast, which was one of the few countries that recognized him. He was given a full pardon in 1981, received back with honors into Nigeria as part of, what do you call it, a national reconciliation. But then when this Muhammadu Bakari, the scumbag who got into power because of Barack Hussein Obama, when he took over as military coup, he arrested and imprisoned this poor Biafran hero. And that's another story entirely. Rebels surrender. I mean, that's just, they were starved and surrendered. Again, they could say they were never beaten in battle, but they were starved into a point where they had to surrender. I think even the folks in the bitter Ainders in the Anglo-Boer War had to say at the end, the British didn't beat them on the battlefield, but they had to surrender because their women and children were dying in the concentration camps. It's like, it's disgusting when you wage war against the civilians. Now, these are realities. Car bombs at churches in Nigeria. Boko Haram has claimed responsibility for thousands of major terrorist attacks on Christians, including assassinations and bombings. And on one Christmas day, a series of coordinated terror attacks targeted churches across Nigeria. Muslims set fire to cars of worshippers outside a church in Damaturu in the capital of Yobe State. A car bomb killed 42 worshippers at a Christmas Day morning service at Madala, just outside the federal capital of Abuja. Some of the churches targeted by these Islamic terror attacks included the Mountain of Fire and Miracles Church in Jos, which is a huge church, colossal. Churches in Maduguri have been burned down and Christians have been killed. And this is what it looks like in Lagos, Nigeria. I mean, look at the dominance of the mosques. Notice, this is a mosque in a Christian area, a Yoruba area, but try and find a church in a Muslim area in the north. And the attacks, horrific. And the mobs, so many churches burned down and bombed out in different ways. And yet, just look at those pictures of the people saying there's no persecution of Christians in Nigeria. Yeah, like there's no targeting of Afrikaans farmers in South Africa. There's no race laws in South Africa. This mega church had a car bomb. A car drove into the church, smashed through the wall, close to the platform, and exploded. This is what part of the car looked like. And the car that detonated, if you can imagine that a bomb does this to a car, what do you think it does to people? Well, in the wake of lethal Christmas Day bombings across northern Nigeria, there were reports of Muslim mobs blocking the paths of the ambulances and delaying their attempts to transport wounded victims from churches to hospitals. A Muslim woman walking past a church burned by looters in Kaduna. Boko Haram, who are they? They've been described as the African Taliban with links to Al-Qaeda. Boko Haram started in Maduguri over 25 years ago. And Muhammad Yusuf started as a Quranic study group. And then they decided to put feet to their faith and to actually apply what's taught in the Quran, which is jihad. And it quickly developed into a pan-African jihadist group determined to establish a Muslim caliphate throughout Western Africa. Just in 2009, more than 700 people were killed in conflicts between Nigerian soldiers and Boko Haram followers. I've got some disturbing pictures here of aftermath of some of these attacks. But does this look like tribesmen? This is what the media calls, no, it's just tribal conflict. I don't know, they look like terrorists to me. Well, Muhammad Yusuf was captured and summarily executed by police at that time. And these poor people, but this is what the media tells you. Boko Haram means Western education is forbidden, or Western education is sacrilege. And they describe themselves as people committed to the propagation of the Prophet's teaching and to jihad. But okay, you may not know much Arabic, but Boko means the book. Haram means forbidden. You know, like halal is permitted, the food is halal, haram is forbidden. So Boko Haram means the Bible is forbidden. Because when they say the book, they mean the Bible. How did journalists translate this as Western education as sin? Where do you get Western? Where do you get education? All you get Boko Haram, 2 words. How can you mistranslate that? It's the Bible is forbidden. That's what Boko Haram stands for. Nigerian government reports Boko Haram finances itself through bank robberies. And they also receive oil money from neighboring Islamic states. Well, that's part of the truth, but what they're leaving out is the Pakistan connection. The Pakistan government is heavily involved in fomenting, aiding, and aggravating the anti-Christian persecution going on in Nigeria. And the United States needs to learn this because America has what? Most favored nation status with Pakistan. Pakistan is considered an American ally. And so America just needs to put a few careful words on Pakistan, and they could close the taps of a lot of the support, a lot of the ideological incitement that's fueling the Boko Haram terrorist campaign in Nigeria. Now, let me give you some of what the Nigerian Muslim community is doing to fuel this. One popular book, which is widely circulated amongst Muslims in Nigeria, declares priests in their churches should, of course, be killed without any exception. They should not build a church nor leave one standing in an area built by the Muslims, if it is Muslim by force. So even an area that wasn't Muslim, but Muslims have seized, no church should be allowed to be left standing, and no church should be allowed to be built. Christians should not be allowed to hinder Muslims from being accommodated at their churches day or night. Any minister has to allow Muslims to come and camp in their church if they want at any time. And that doesn't mean they won't desecrate the church. Gongs and bells should be hidden. No religious rites should be public. Christians should not display their Christian convictions openly, which could mean wearing a Christian t-shirt or wearing a cross. I'm sure that Christian bumper stickers on your car would also be forbidden. We are absolutely certain about declaring a person to be a kafir who belies or denies any of the foundations of Shariah, or anything that is known by certainty to have been a deed by the messenger. That's a sign of the sword, which is part of popular books in Nigeria. At the Islam in Africa conference in Abuja, that's in 1989, the resolution issued at the conclusion of the conference declared their determination to show the whole world that Nigeria is truly an Islamic nation, to support the establishment and application of the Shariah. This is why missionaries were advising the British to give northern Nigeria separate independence from southern Nigeria, and preferably even separate southeast and southwestern Nigeria into 3 separate countries. Because the north is determined to advocate Sharia law, and nobody else wants to live under Sharia law, to ensure the appointment of only Muslims into strategic national international posts of member nations. At the Islam in Africa conference in Abuja, the resolution issued said that it was to eradicate in all its forms and ramifications all non-Muslim religions in member nations. Such religions shall include Christianity. Because some Muslims believe that Christianity is an exception, it's a monotheistic religion, you must tolerate Christianity. And the Quran does say dispute not with the people of the book. And it does seem that the Quran has respect for Christians, but the radical Muslims try to avoid that and go past that. Because they say, but that's now been abrogated. Those are earlier surahs. Only Muslims elected to political posts of all member nations to ensure the declaration of Nigeria, the 24th African and 46th world member of the Organization of Islamic Countries, a federal Islamic sultanate, to ensure the ultimate replacement of all Western forms of legal and judicial systems with the Sharia in all member nations, which means women get executed if they report that they've been raped, which means that Christian testimony is invalid against a Muslim, which means a woman's testimony is invalid against a man, and so on. And that's Sharia law. To write the history of Islam in Africa and of Muslims and institutions from authentic Islamic viewpoint, to propagate the knowledge of Islam throughout the continent, to call on Muslims to review the syllabi in the various educational institutions with a view to bringing them into conformity with Islamic ideals, goals, and principles, to serve the needs of their community. So they want to rewrite all the school books, everything like that. To encourage the teaching of Arabic language, which is the language of the Quran, as well as the lingua franca of the continent, to make Arabic the language of Africa. To strive for the restoration of the use of Arabic, to establish strong economic ties between African Islamic countries and other parts of the Muslim world, in order to facilitate mutual assistance and cooperation based on Islamic principles. These are statements, these are declarations, these are books that you get in Nigeria. The chairman of the Bureau for Islamic Propagation, Bashir Othman Tofa, who was once a presidential candidate, he declared, "These dangerous devils calling themselves Christians We Muslims cannot sacrifice our religion or our self-respect for any kind of peaceful coexistence. It is time to begin the offensive. Let us begin by proclaiming Friday as our Sabbath. Do away with the Christian Red Cross symbol. Let us found our own Islamic Jihad of Nigeria to counteract the evil machinations of the Christian Association of Nigeria. Let us act now. I can tell you the Christian Association of Nigeria is very mild, very non-confrontational. To think that they need to be counteracted is bizarre. The Muslim Brothers issued this statement, which declared as their objective the establishment of the Shariah of Allah, the destruction of kafir from the face of the earth. It is this kafir system which gives these slaves, these Christians, it puts them on the same level. It even raised the Christians higher than the Muslims. It is necessary that we rise up and destroy oppressors and the kafir system. Ulamas must rise up and take the lead for the annihilation of kafirs. Oh, we are tired of the kafir system of government, Jewish laws and decrees, and all the rest acts of worship of Christianity upon us. All the Christians must be brought out to the public and be shot. From now on, Thursdays and Fridays must be the work-free days. Fight them until there remains no tumult, no fitna on the face of the earth, and religion becomes for Allah alone. Now, I've documented all this in my book, Slavery, Terrorism, Islam, Historical Roots and Contemporary Threat, which has a lot of chapters on Nigeria and a lot of these principles. Boko Haram has been credited with over 100,000 killings in Nigeria in the last 25 years. Now, when you look at these guys, you just realize this is a peaceful and tolerant religion. And I'm sorry, there's some disgusting pictures of the massacres and the persecution and the bombings. And this is just covering the first decade of Boko Haram's more egregious actions and attacks. Do you notice Jos right here? It's the northernmost Christian city in Nigeria, surrounded on three sides by Islam. So Jos is a real battleground. If you hear of horrible things, it's often them. They're the ones experiencing it. You should know about Samuel Ajayi Crowther, the first Anglican African bishop, and he was, along with Mary Slessor, two of the great pioneer leaders of Nigeria as a Christian country. Sad that they were never allowed to evangelize in the Muslim North, which is why we've got the mess we've got today. But Jos is the flashpoint. And they've got massive churches in Nigeria. And I've been invited to minister in Lagos, Abuja, in Jos. And there have been some massive crusades and a lot of terrorism. This is the one daily non-Muslim newspaper in Lagos, so that got bombed. Some churches now have private security detachments entrenched with machine gun nests behind sandbags to protect the congregations from assault. You see, there's a church, and here you've got the security guards ready to protect. In numerous towns, motorbikes have been banned. No motorbikes allowed in some towns, in fear of Boko Haram, who repeatedly have used motorbikes for hit-and-run attacks. It's easy, you've got the chapter riding, and they can go past the concrete blocks to stop vehicles coming in, and the man in the back is one throwing the grenades or using the machine gun. Now, President Goodluck Jonathan actually declared a state of emergency to tackle Boko Haram, which has been rescinded under Muhammadu Buhari. On New Year's Eve, he also closed Nigeria's borders with Niger, Cameroon, and Chad, from which many of the supplies for Boko Haram come. Has anyone here ever seen the film Tears of the Sun? Bruce Willis produced a very surprising film, and it was obviously a fictitious film, but it was very realistic when it depicted the kind of atrocities that the Boko Haram Islamic terrorists are conducting against Christians in Tears of the Sun, including persecution of the church. So this is one of the few Hollywood films that I found was surprisingly had some redeeming features. But of course, what I think would surprise most people is to know, do you know more Christians died in Jos, Nigeria on September 11th, 2001 than all the Americans victims of the terrorism that day? Now, we all know what happened in New York to some extent.
That was an inside job.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying it wasn't, but on that day, September 11th, 2001, 7,000 Christians were killed in Jos, Nigeria. That's much more than all the Americans who died in the terrorist attacks in America that day. So Muslims came out of the mosque, this was a Friday, lunchtime, shouting Allah Akbar as they heard the news that the towers had fallen. And they must have known something was going to happen that would give them a window of opportunity that they could do anything they wanted and nobody would pay attention. Because all the world's media was totally focused on Washington, New York at that time. And they went on a rampage. They tore a Christian pregnant woman to pieces, and they went on a rampage and destroyed over 100 churches and hundreds of businesses in Jos, Nigeria. Now, these are just some of the pictures I took, showing you what I saw in Jos, Nigeria. Christian homes, Christian churches burned, bombed, but none of this reached the news media in America or Britain or South Africa at that time. They just went on the rampage, destroying, bombing. And by the way, the whole time this was happening, the army and the police were doing absolutely nothing. Now, I spoke to survivors. I documented a lot of the atrocities. And I mean, these are people with all heart-rending stories, which I put in the Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam book. But I don't know if this was done mockingly as a joke by the victims or if this was done by the attackers. But Islam is for peace does seem to be a bit of a joke. And then an 18-wheeler Pentechnican truck came in from northern Niger and capsized on the road in Jos. And it spilled thousands of AK-47 assault rifles and crates of ammunition on the ground. And so local people took this as God's provision, took the weapons, fought back. Up till then, all they'd had to fight back with was spades and pickaxes and sometimes a bow and arrow. And now they had real weapons. And they chased the Muslim jihadists out of Jos, totally. And so Jos was liberated. And the army and the police, who had remained in their barracks the whole time the Christians were being slaughtered, suddenly came out after peace was restored. Isn't that typical? And then they disarmed the people of all these weapons. So they couldn't protect the citizens of Nigeria, but they could disarm them. Now, this is the problem we're dealing with. And this is typical, I'm sorry to say, of these countries, where the government does nothing to protect its people, but it does work to stop them being able to protect themselves. And so I wrote about this in different Frontline Fellowship newses over the years, but documented most of it in the Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam book, which got me a death threat fatwa as a result of producing this book, by the way. These were my first hosts, Mount Carmel Christian School in Jos. They'd invite me to come through. And of course, as always, we took lots of books and Bibles. This is one of the more embarrassing advertising posters. Conference, Peter Hammond, the man whom death has no power over. I wish that was true, but that's a bit presumptuous. But, sorry?
The threats of death have no power over you, maybe.
Well, yes, I suppose so, but the man whom death has no power over, they took that from the fact that I'd been bombed a few times and survived. But still, anyway, this is Mount Carmel Christian Schools organizing a conference and ministers seminar. Notice the thick wall and the metal gate around the church. And by the way, the church meets in the upper area because it's easier to defend. The churches are built with security in mind because they get attacked. Now, these churches are well organized, let me tell you. By the time I finished my presentation, by the time I got to the door, they had already, with my picture and the details, had the audio, the videos and audio cassettes ready for sale. The presentation I've just given that morning or that evening. And these Nigerians they're entrepreneurs, they're organizers, they are seriously organized. And their radio programs are very outstanding. The impact, the biggest need in Nigeria, from what I could gather, is Christian books and Bibles. They are organized, but they're very, very short of supplies. They don't have enough Bibles for their people. Now, I was taken on my second mission to Sudan, to Nigeria, to the slave market in Badagry, which is where the British closed down the slave market. Interestingly, the Nigerian kings requested the British to come to Nigeria and to protect them from the slave raiders. And so I even had the people explain to me in the museum, the British didn't invade us. We invited them to come, to put an end to the slave trades and the slave raids and to set our people free. And Here they're showing the chains that the Portuguese and Arabs used to use for enslaving the people in Badagry. The first double-story building in Nigeria. It's the Church Missionary Society's home. This is where the missionaries stayed in Badagry, which is not too far from Lagos. And this was the museum curator. He showed me the Missionary Trust Fund. He showed that these bricks and the corrugated iron came from Britain. They shipped these in and they built the first double-story building in Nigeria. And now he shows me the interpreter's desk and the Bible. And notice the picture of Samuel Ajay Crowther behind. He stayed in this very house. So this is Samuel Ajay Crowther's headquarters when he, after being rescued from slave raiders by the British Navy, trained in Liberia, later consecrated as a bishop in Canterbury Cathedral in London, came back and evangelized his Yoruba people. One of the first people he baptized was his own mother, and he gave her the name Hannah at baptism. So he was Samuel. That name had been given to him by the missionary who had educated him in Liberia, Sierra Leone. And so Hannah gave her son to the Lord, and the Lord gave him back to her. So he was Samuel, and his mother was Hannah. And it's wonderful to see these people preserving their history. And this is a very lush area. And there's so many churches. The growth of the church in Nigeria is phenomenal. You see so many churches, but you see too many mosques. And you can see here a church on one side and a mosque on the other. And this is what you see in Nigeria. The mosques are so frequent, and they all broadcast by their big speakers their call to prayer. So the Christians counteract, and the Christian churches, and they all have their PA systems facing outwards, and everything we pray, everything we sing, everything we preach in the church is broadcast in the neighborhood.
Wow.
They reckon, well, if the Muslims can broadcast, so can we. And so they reminded me, remember, all of our neighbors can hear what you're preaching. Yes? I mean, they've got these speakers pointing out to us everywhere, absolutely extraordinary. So the Nigerians really are into spiritual warfare. This is Abuja. By the way, that's a gold-plated dome. Gold-plated, not painted, plated, gold-plated. Can you imagine? With so much poverty and starvation around, and yet they can waste gold on the dome of some mosque. And of course, the church is burnt, but and there's memorials to the war. Mary Slessor is much respected in Ibu land, and we've got testimonies about her, how she brought an end to the killing of twins. Wonderful work that she did there. Let me just get past. Oh, this is showing you some of the traffic. Interesting what you travel on, what you see on backs of transport trucks. See the palm tree and the cross swords? Islam, written over there. Showing how peaceful and tolerant they are, of course. There's quite a lot of girls who will be dressed in hijabs, which is not very African, and this is one of the hottest countries around, virtually on the equator, so that's a bit bizarre. Some of the Air Force memorials, like to the MiGs, reminding us the British trained the paratroopers, but the Soviets trained their pilots. And this is something absolutely bizarre. Nigeria is one of the top oil-producing countries in the world. I think it's 15th oil-producing country in the world. You get to the oil stations and you expect the petrol to be cheap. And it is fairly cheap, fairly. But all the oil refineries have broken down, so they've got to ship the oil off to Brazil to get refined and brought back, which is not efficient. But still, it's only a few cents a litre for the petrol. But when you get there, you can't get there. I don't know if you can see, but the people in front with trolleys. So they've got their trolleys, and they are loading up petrol cans. And they somehow have right of way. And so those of us in a car are waiting. Now, you can jump the queue if you go on the road, and they'll sell you the petrol in their jerry cans. It's, of course, inflated in price now, but for convenience, and then they can spill it over the side of your car, pretend to get it in an oil tank. But that's the kind of chaos you've got in Nigeria. cheap petrol, but if you want to get the petrol without standing in a queue for a couple of hours or days, you've got to go to the chap selling it on the sidewalk who can get the oil quicker than you can. So, I mean, this is what you look at. Every petrol station is this kind of traffic congestion, queue, shambles of a mess. And of course, there are a lot of scooters. People like their scooters. There you can see this filling up jerry cans. They get right of way. And here's this chap selling his petrol on the side of the road, which you'll end up preferring. Now, I might say that when I first arrived in Nigeria, in Lagos, I should say, they took my suitcase and threw it in the boot. And when I got this out and got into my room, I smelled petrol, lots of petrol. How's this? And it's happened, my whole case and my clothes inside affected by petrol. Because everybody everywhere travels around with petrol in the back of their car, but they don't have lids. The lids have been lost in many cases. So you can see there's plastic around there for acting instead of your cap. And so the people are driving around, and in the back of their car, they've got their jerry can, which they need for their generator, because the electricity keeps going out and you need the generators. And of course, they fall over. So the back of the car's boot is just awash with petrol floating from one side to the other, or sometimes diesel. And they didn't mind just putting my suitcase in there. And the suitcase is not waterproof, so my clothes were all reeking of petrol. And the amount of women doing work with hand, not with the proper tools to clean the streets. I mean, that's backbreaking work, literally. Notice the people riding on motorbikes without helmets. Notice the amount of passengers on a motorbike. Notice even kiddies and babies in the front of a bike. And what people can carry on the backs of their bikes. And some even have shade. And mattress on the back of the bike. Notice this woman in a dress without a helmet. And babies strapped to the back. You can't imagine what it's like. And of course, there's lots of accidents. This motorbike almost got me too on this occasion. I walked past, felt this whiz, and I just stepped across the road and I heard this crash behind me. Turned and took that picture. The amount of smashed vehicles, I don't know what the problem is, whether people are drinking and driving, but there's a lot of things on the sidewalk. So you see shops, I don't know what the shops are there for, because it looks like all the wares on the sidewalk. And you can buy anything there. As I said, you can get anything from an elephant to a photocopy machine to a rocket launcher on the side of the street. You can buy almost anything on the streets in Nigeria, and the people are so innovative and such entrepreneurs. And by the way, because it's such a high population people, the sense of competition is so much higher. I don't think our businessmen would survive with Nigerians next to them. Nigerians are so much more aggressive in their salesmanship. So, you know, we might have 2 or 3 people coming up trying to sell us something at a traffic light in Cape Town. Now, they'll have like 14 or 15 at every traffic light. You can't go anywhere without lots and lots of salesmen. And they're pushing and promoting almost anything. So everybody seems to have some business on the go. This is the washing machine area, making bricks. There's a lot of terrorism. And I was in the very area where Tears to the Sun was based and focused on. And there were graves of South African missionaries from Wellington, who came from Africa Institute, who had planted the gospel amongst those people. And I went there, they were celebrating 100 years of the gospel having arrived in that part of Nigeria, where Boko Haram is very, very active. And they came from Wellington, South Africa, sent out by Andrew Murray. We had opportunities of ministering at theological colleges, and I've produced the book, Biblical Principles for Africa, just shortly before that to give to all the participants. And these churches, many times just thatched roof buildings, dynamic. And I mean, everywhere I went, banners. They're happy to put up all kinds of banners. And because the title of one of my books was Putting Feet to Your Faith, that was the theme for a lot of the rallies and outreaches. This is the university where I was called to give lectures. Notice the Nigerian flag looks somewhat similar to the Rhodesian flag, green, white, and green. So many churches and so much dynamic, all kinds of interesting posters out there. God First Art, all-purpose prayer. And they've got, this is part of a car shop. I don't know that this would inspire you to want to send your vehicle in there. My Destiny. Interestingly, we were on the road, and you know, if there's 2 lanes, they will have 4 lanes. And we were at one point driving along, and suddenly a bus came past and ripped off the bumper. And we stopped and going back to complain, because it's okay to pedal beat the car. Sometimes we're going along, there are vehicles on both sides, and they're sort of pedal beating the car from both sides. But suddenly the bumper went off, like, no, this is too much. Now suddenly that's an issue. But all the cars are scratched and bumped, because here our roads, they would fit 4 lanes in every road that's got 2 lanes. Yes, people, they've got so many vehicles and the people are impatient. You can see the growth of the churches everywhere, the growth of ministry opportunities. Had so many opportunities to minister there. And this is one place where I burst one of my video projector bulbs. Hi, Tricia, welcome back.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Good to see you back here. This just gives you a bit of a feel. This is kind of normal Nigeria. You're giving a presentation, there's somebody there with a video camera standing right in front of you, and he's going to be selling the video at the end of the service. These guys are so organized, they've got their duplicating machines with them. I mean, they're like, they can print the covers, pictures they've taken there, it's all organized. That was normal. And because the generator is going up and down regularly, one of my bulbs went during one of these meetings, and I was glad I traveled with a spare bulb. But yeah, you can just see again, the cameras all over the place. The audiovisual department takes things very seriously over there. Notice the kind of robes that they wear. They got me one of those too, with the hats as well. So the first day I came back from Nigeria, I walked into the mission looking like that and had people in a state of shock. But that's what the Nigerians wear. It's very cool in hot climates. But yeah, prayer times, just giving a bit of a feel for the outreaches in Nigeria. They loved the Biblical Principles for Africa book. And I had so many people wanting their pictures taken and signing books and things like that. They treat you like a celebrity over there. But so many Bible cultures, so much enthusiasm, so much. While I was there, I actually got about as sick as I've ever been, and it turned out to be a tooth infection. When I got back to South Africa, the dentist said, "How have you managed the last few days?" And they didn't believe how it could have been operational. But I thought I had some cold or flu, and then discovered later it was just abscess in my tooth. Hebrews 13 verse 3 declares, "Remember the prisoners as if chained with them. Those who mistreat and see yourself are in the body also." We should be praying for the Muslim world. Remember, that includes northern Nigeria.